So yeah, thank you very much for coming, everyone. Special thanks to John, Rob, and Stuart, who are going to be our panelists today, who are hopefully going to answer some questions from me and whatever interesting questions you've got for them to answer as well. So yeah, this is the first MegaCon mini after MegaCon a couple of months ago, which we think went really well. From the feedback we got, went really well as well. So we're going to be running hopefully a series of these throughout the year, picking a different topic each time and getting different people on to talk about different bits and pieces in the mega game space. And see what everyone thinks. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do a quick intro on themselves now. If you can just keep it fairly brief, guys, and we'll go from there. Rob, if I can ask you to start.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Rob. I have been role-playing, mega gaming, all sorts of gaming for several years now. I started off with Call of Cthulhu when I was 8. That probably explains quite a few things. But otherwise, I have an interest in play-by-email games simply because, and I've already run one, simply because we have the pandemic. And I think they're a great way to build immersion and tie people into a game, which gives a real sense of ownership. And that's one of the reasons I'm here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. John.
Hi, yes, I'm John. Yes, I've been gaming for, since I was a nipper, basically, doing all sorts of, Warhammer and role-playing stuff, and more recently mega games, and designing them for a lot of that time. Yes, I guess a bit like Rob, I've done bits and pieces of online gaming before, but play-by-email games specifically was because I played in Rob's Inquisitor game and wanted to do one of my own, basically, during the pandemic.
Thank you very much, John. And Stuart.
Thank you. Well, this is going to be a big surprise to everyone, but I am also a huge nerd who's played loads of role-playing games, mega games, and board games before. And I also played in Rob's game and John's game and thought, yep, this sounds pretty great. And we're all trapped in a pandemic anyway, so why not do it?
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, 3D. So yeah, we've got the three runners of the 3 play-by-email games so far. So hopefully we'll get some interesting chat going. And remember to pop any questions you've got into the pub. So I'm going to start off, which is possibly the most contentious question. Are PbEM games mega games? They don't have maps, they don't have team hierarchies, there's unequal opportunities to engage, and they've got a higher role play quotient than a normal mega game, and they're over a much longer period of time. So we're going to start that question off with Rob, who was the first person to run one of these. So Rob, are the play-by-email games mega games?
I would say that they're nuts. I would also quibble with various bits that you raised there. That's what we're here for, to argue about definitions. So maps, hierarchies, yep, they're things that the Morana Freeform definitely had. But I'd also like to say thank you for someone else who ran the game that actually inspired me to do this, who is Tim. As Tim Natalie Campbell ran a fantastic game based on an alternative history setting, and it was through flagrantly stealing his mechanics that this came to be. But yeah, I'd say they share a lot of adjacent things with mega games, but they're not mega games in and of themselves. They're also a fairly established thing. I know that people used to play them and post details to each other. And I've had one person tell me that they even played games where they used to post floppy disks to each other with various details. So this is a bit of an update to an old format. And I think that it's not a mega game, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not quite old enough to have done it on floppy disk, but I definitely did it on forums and message boards back in the day. Okay, thanks for that, Rob. Before we go general commentary, let's get John and Stuart to ask the question, starting with John.
I'm not sure I'm interested in answering the question, to be honest. I think games are games, and it is what it is, essentially. Like most people, we don't really know what a mega game is to start with. So Whether one of these is or not, they could certainly be more mega gamey. I think even in the existing format, maybe that's slightly more interesting. Like like Morana had a map. We had a map in a couple of maps, I mean, you can have hierarchies, you can have more mechanisms and that sort of thing. There's no reason why they have to look like we've been running them so far. It looks more mega game like.
Sure. Okay, let me reframe the question to you differently then. Is there a benefit to calling them mega games if it confuses the message when telling people what mega games are?
I think it's mega games are kind of a marketing term, really. So it depends, I guess, if your audience understand that this isn't a normal, certainly not a normal mega game, shall we say. As long as you market it that way, I guess that's not too bad.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Stuart, on to you.
So yeah, I broadly agree with John that this isn't. We're kind of getting into a debate about what is a mega game. So I'm just going to give a controversial answer just to make at least one person in the audience furious. I'd say it is a mega game because there's a lot of people in there. Now I don't know if size is the best way to actually determine what is or isn't a mega game, but yeah, that's one metric. So by my logic, it's a mega game, and I can feel someone tearing off their headphones in anger, and that sustains me.
Yeah, as I said, I asked a question basically because there's been a lot of chat, and it's a running joke basically about you can't describe a mega game, and you're right, there are various people tearing their hair out and going crazy, but there's also things we grow as a community. And to be honest, an example, trying to set up more interviews for further down the line, a couple of people we've gone to, they go, well, what's a mega game? And it's not very easy to describe that right now on normal terms, so it's easier for what I would call a normal mega game. So it's basically the point around, by calling these mega games rather than play-by-email games, which, as Rob pointed out, have existed for 20, 30 years, do we make it harder to describe our community and core mega games to new players? Open to the floor.
A lot of answers there. That's a very tricky question, I think you've asked. And I don't think there is going to be a clear answer from this. But I think even within the more trad kind of mega game space, the ones that are more famous, your classic kind of watch the sky designs, even within the more traditional ones, there's a lot of variation in how it works and how things are done. So while I would completely agree this is very different and people need to know that up front, and it maybe isn't the most useful sort of intro to mega games unless you know what you're getting into, I think the mega game space is only getting broader, and I kind of have to agree with what John said earlier, that it's mostly a marketing term anyway. And if we have this idea of mega games are this structure and this structure only, then sort of linking to what you said just then, we're just kind of limiting our growth into more interesting and weird spaces. And who doesn't like weird, interesting game spaces?
Indeed.
Yeah, I think we need to. I think too many games are too like Watch the Skies anyway. So if we can start broadening what is or isn't a mega game, and experimenting with a format, then that can't be a bad thing.
Cool. Rob, anything from you on that one?
I would very happily sit here and talk for hours about definitions of mega games, but I don't want to move away from the play-by-email topic for the time being. But as anyone knows, if someone wants to go to the pub sometime and talk about what is or is not a mega game, that's fine. But for the time being, I'll echo what John said, and it's not useful.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Sorry, John. What's that?
We reject your question, basically.
Yeah, reject my question. That's absolutely fine. Fine for people to do. They can reject the question, though. As I did, I'll push you on it a little bit because I think it's an interesting thing to talk about purely because when you talk about a board game space, you talk about different types of board games, so people have a clear idea of what they're getting into. When you talk about movies, you talk about genres. When you talk about role-playing games, you talk about genres. So if we're just calling everything a mega game, it makes it harder to get the correct people into the correct game. From my point of view, although I definitely agree, we don't want to spend too much time focusing on terms. It's better to just get on with making new stuff, but it is something to be considered. I said on that, we'll move on then. And going back slightly, and on Rob, you again, I'm afraid. What was the intention when you started Morana Golf, since it was the first one of these?
We had the pandemic on, and there was very much a feeling that I wanted to recapture the fun and the frustration that Tim's game had given us. And I thought one of the best ways to do that would be to run a similar setup. So online, with people able to come together and have moments where they talked in person, but for every turn was a week. For the rest of the time, people would be emailing each other, and the sheer joy of seeing that email and not knowing whether it contains someone saying, I'm about to blast you out of the void, or I've got a nefarious plan, let's work together, was, well, as umpire, that was fun to see, but remembering as a player from the game that I played previously, yeah, it was just a lot of fun to help facilitate people doing fun things at a time, which I think we can all acknowledge was pretty crappy. And on top of that, I did it in the homebrew 40k setting that I use for all my role-playing games. So it was a chance to play with a lot of the characters that some people were already familiar with. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that went for 23 weeks with just you running it?
It did. It went for 23 weeks with me running it. I've posted in the pub, I believe, the Morana by the numbers end of game sort of infographic, so you can see how many emails I dealt with, how many players there were, etc. I think in terms of, I learned a lot from it. So if I ran another one in future, I definitely consider having fewer players, or doing what very sensible people who may be here are doing, which is have multiple control. But as a learning experience, it was a lot of fun to go through.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And kind of going on in order then, John, what was it about Morana that inspired you to run
Yeah, I mean, well, so enjoyed my time in the Morana Golf, and yeah, I mean, I guess over the summer I've been sort of struggling to adapt games to go online. Don't know if anyone remembers, I was doing the Anubis Heresy. I did a couple of Anubis Heresy playtests over there that was trying to get the sort of new all singing, all dancing technology up and running. And it was very frustrating, basically. And I kind of needed to run something. And having just finished Morana Golf, basically the idea of, well, hang on, I could do something like this, you know, something mega game sized at least, shall we say. But if we just used email, I wouldn't have to worry about all this programming malarkey. So it was kind of born out of frustration, to be perfectly honest. I kind of came up with the idea at the end of August, and then by the beginning of October, we were sending emails around to each other playing the game. Yeah, so it was appealing because we could get it up and running quickly, and you know, it had been fun, so it was going to be fun.
Yeah, okay. And Stuart, on to you for Afterlife then.
So the initial idea for Afterlife I had after my first or my second sort of real life mega game, when, like many people, I was like, I want to make my own. Initially, I had this idea about these demons sort of fighting in a vacuum, in power vacuum in hell. But then it kind of changed into a game set in the afterlife. And I had a lot of interesting design ideas, mostly around player objectives. But I was smart enough to realize that the ideas I had were just not workable in the traditional mega game space. After playing in Rob's Morana Golf game, I thought to myself, I'd love to run one of these. Started throwing some ideas together before John beat me to the punch, and I joined his game and learned even more from it. And towards the end of his game, I kind of had a brainwave and realized that this format and this idea that I'd had years ago and just shelved because it wasn't practical, suddenly I had found the format that would make this design idea work. And on the whole, it was a success. I'll go into this if people want. I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, if you do a brief recap, because I think I've got some questions later that will go to more specifics. But if you want to do a brief overview.
Very briefly, with the exception of some unusual players who were angels and demons, which includes John actually, the players were given 3 objectives that were fairly loosely worded. They weren't explicit like objectives like you might normally get. And because in a play-by-ear or mega game, control are always watching you, which is very different from a real life game. They are completely aware of what's going on, although it can be hard to follow. We were able to sort of take these abstract objectives and see when they'd completed them. And to incentivize players completing these objectives, they got some sort of thematic and narrative and mechanical rewards, because every single player character in that game had lost the memories of their life because they were actually all dead. And it was unlocking the secrets of their life. And when they unlocked all their objectives, in addition to big reveals, they got a cool new power to play around with, which is a really great way to solve the issues objectives in mega games either being ignored by the players who weren't into them, and also I made them, hopefully most of the objectives I gave people were quite broad and could be interpreted in multiple ways, which encouraged sort of creativity and flexibility. Not always successful, but that was the design idea.
Yeah, okay, that's great, thank you. So that brings us nicely on to one of the next things that I wanted to talk about. We might spend a little bit of time on this. And I kind of had a question down, which was, what do play-by-email games bring to the scene? But more specifically, something I'm interested in is what are the opportunities around storytelling? Because it's more difficult to do long-form storytelling when you've got a mega game that is 8 hours long. So what do you see as the opportunities around that? And we'll start with you, Stuart, because it's a nice jumping off point from what you were just talking about.
I mean, I think while you can definitely play a traditional mega game in character, people go in costume, they speak in character, and it's very fun. There doesn't tend to be the level of immersion I've seen in all 3 of these sort of play-by-ear mega games, where people were quite openly discussing at the end, especially of Afterlife and how people are particularly invested, how invested they've got in their character's well-being, to the point that actually I think some people are being sort of interviewed by a psychologist who's interested in this, the psychologist in question being one of the players. In fact, I will confess, I think I may have made some people cry at the end of Afterlife because of the suffering that their characters went through, which fills me with a complicated mix of emotions. But I think in terms of immersion, can really go quite far with this format.
Yeah, and from the players for Afterlife, how, what, there are 22 concurrent players at the end? How equally out of that do you think that immersion was? How many people do you think were super invested? How many people were kind of invested? And how many people had basically not been sending many emails towards the end?
I don't have a number breakdown off the top of my head, but there definitely was a variety. And this leads on to one of the questions that's been asked, I'm sure we'll come to later, where, yes, some people will get completely into this and go hell for leather. Other people will get kind of involved, but won't get as tied in. And some people will send a few emails and they'll play the game, but they won't get that invested. We definitely have some people in all 3 of those categories at the end of the game.
Yeah. Okay. Well, back to more about the kind of storytelling opportunities. You, John, this time.
Yeah, I think I guess one of the sort of unique things about play-by-email games that we don't get in a regular game of any type, to be honest, is kind of just the amount, the sort of controls eye view of things is it's a good sort of opportunity, I think, for, like, you can spend the time, you can see what everybody's doing, you can see who's communicating with who, and you can try and see, you know, oh, this player isn't engaging with this, or in Ur especially, if players engage with something, we made more of that happen in a way that we wouldn't have been able to if we didn't have weeks in order to sort of change our plots and that sort of thing. It was very, players are interested in a thing, let's make the thing more interesting, and by the end of it, everything, all the plots pretty much at the end, bar one of the big ones, I think, were pretty much the players got interested in this minor plot, and it just kept growing. And we had a document listing all the players and what plots they were invested in and what they would need to happen to see a resolution to their arc and that sort of thing. Like, there was a lot of, we could put in a lot of detail basically into sort of managing the player experience, which was nice.
Yeah. Okay. And how much kind of leeway did you give characters if they were engaging with something in a way that you hadn't thought about or you felt wasn't the right way? What's the kind of feedback on that?
I suppose there's one situation where we didn't. So broadly, if they're interested in something, if they started digging up stuff or researching things, then we would, they could go down a rabbit hole as long as they liked. There was a civil war that happened on another planet that they ended up getting massively involved in, and we ended up drawing a map and all sorts. The thing where we did end up reining them in, which was quite contentious, was there was essentially one group of players formed a sort of revolutionary committee who wanted to change the city for the better because it was a rather bit of a hellhole, really, politically. And then the other group, which was the council, but they weren't the city council, and maybe this is about setting expectations. They were a sort of a disaster relief council, conclave of cinders. So when the revolutionaries come to them and say, we demand, democratic representation and we demand seats on councils and that sort of thing, and the conclave said, oh yeah, sure, certainly we can give you that. That it was that stepping outside of the sort of the powers that people have within the setting, I guess. So we ended up reading that back in a bit. It all got a little bit messy, to be honest. So that didn't work brilliantly, but a lot of the other stuff certainly, we let people go as far as they liked. There's a god called He Who Reigns, who was this minor sort of bit part, sort of like a throwaway line in a bit of lore somewhere, but someone got really excited by, and then started dragging other people into the plot. And by the end of the game, he was invading the city with an army and all sorts.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So on to you, Rob, then, around this, and I'm kind of interested for your take, because unlike the other two, you didn't have a team of people working on the story with you. You did it all yourself. So you basically wrote 16 or 22 responses basically every week, and there was a decent chunk of writing and story in there. So how did you view the kind of opportunities around that?
I think there are a couple of things there. You've got what I actually did and what I think that the advantages are of the medium. Just because I've been sat here thinking about it, I'd like to mention that one of the things I think is actually fantastic for play-by-email games is the opportunity for legacy games, and the possibility of continued shared universes. In addition to that, there's also, from the player perspective, the timing issue. Some players who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend mega games or do a 3 or 4 hour weekly role-playing session can dip in and do an email or two and still feel as though they're getting a bit of a gaming fix. But then what you asked specifically, it ate up Sundays, at least half a Sunday, depending on how much the players did. I reasonably like to think that I set a degree of expectations around the players. As a quick aside, the Morana Gulf was a setting in Warhammer 40,000, grimdark, awful future. They're in a region of space that isn't entirely controlled by the Imperial faction. So they go in, there are a load of Inquisitors, so high-powered people who could do very important and influential things, and they had to work out how to make everything work. But in that, they threw all sorts at me, and it was interesting to see the ingenuity and the depravity of some of the players. But it did essentially boil down to every week on a Sunday, I would have between 6 and 8 hours worth of email writing and research to do, which my partner Charlotte was very happy about, and she really enjoyed the fact that I was glued to my computer for half a day. But yeah, otherwise, I think there's a lot of very interesting and positive things I think you can do with play by email. Although I think it does also require a certain mindset, as I don't know if it would necessarily be satisfying to some people who want instant gratification, as that's not what this is about. This is slow burn. This is the politics side of Game of Thrones. This isn't, oh no, we've got the last season, we have to fit everything in, shit, what do we do? Game of Thrones. So, and also I'd like to echo what Stuart said about the immersion, as we had some players turn up to general Zoom calls in costume, which was fantastic to see. And I know that a couple of the players have also built their characters actually in Warhammer 40,000. So if anyone ever wants to meet some delightfully unhinged Inquisitors, then I can show them pictures of them that have come directly out of this game.
Well, that's yeah, I've been very impressed with seeing some of those models. Okay, we'll go on to one of the questions from the audience, and then back to another question from the audience that I want to spend a bit more time on. But the first one, as the panel have all run these games, what do you think of a much larger play by email game, as in 60 plus players? John, why don't you kick off?
Yeah, I mean, so I probably ran I think the largest of the three. We had 30, 33, 35, something like that, players most of the game. Yeah, so it doesn't. You would certainly have to give it some thought, and I mean, I've certainly given some thought. One of the things that I was perhaps hoping for from that I didn't get was the idea of a game where you could dip in and out a little bit more, rather than a game that's super immersive and takes all your time. So I think if that was a design goal that could be solved, then you could then scale the game. Because if you get more out of a game by talking to more people, and there are 70 people, the person who doesn't have a life and just talks to 70 people will end up dominating the game in a way that they never could in a normal sized mega game. So I think some thought towards how communications works would be required in order to scale a play-by-email game up in a sort of satisfying way.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Stuart, I know you put a little bit of stuff in the pub, but do you want to reiterate your thoughts on voice?
First, I'll just say to John that there's no need to call me out like that in public with regards to the person who emailed 70 people. That was not cool of you. I'm kidding, of course. I think, first of all, in terms of making a game that was massive, you probably want to split it down into smaller sub-games that were all linked together to avoid someone talking to 70 people and to make control easier, even if you had a system that was less immersive. Because I think it's actually a really good point to make that these three games in many ways represent an evolutionary tree, where sort of we were both, Rob's game massively inspired John's, and John's game massively inspired mine, and I think the next one that's being run, Dusk City, is another branch on this tree, but there have been similar sort of online games played as well as these, and there are other ways you can go. You definitely can do what sort of John wants to do, a game where you would dip in and out more, but it would need quite a different structure. So I think, John's got a good point that with a completely different setup, one that was perhaps less reliant on player communication, or perhaps phrasing this better, handled communication completely differently, you could do a much bigger thing and it wouldn't be absolutely insane. But if you did a game like like these ones, in terms of design, with 60 or 70 players, you'd need to split into smaller subgroups, and even then, your control team, they would probably catch fire.
Yeah. Rob, anything for you to add?
No, not particularly. I mean, I really enjoy big mega games. I don't know if I would enjoy running or participating in a big play by email, as one of the things I think about them is I tend to think of them in an extended kilo game fashion. As a quick glossary reference here for people who might not know what a kilo game is, it's basically a game that feels a bit like a mega game but smaller. And I value one of the things about the play by email formats that I've seen and participated in, the intimacy almost. So there are, I thought it was valuable and really fun to have a close group of people, even if that's a dozen or more of you who are sharing this game space. Once it gets bigger, you might lose some of that, and people might think that's cool, but it's not necessarily what I'm so interested in. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So on to the next one then, which Becky has asked in a slightly different way in the pub, and I'd written in a slightly different way. But do play-by-email games have a problem with unequal engagement, or is it a feature? And going off that, depending on your answer, how would you fix it if you think it is a problem? John?
Yeah, slightly trying to intimate that earlier. I think it is, to an extent, a problem. I think if you can put in more or less time, as you wish to, what am I trying to say? If you want to spend a little bit more time or a little bit less time playing the game, and you can still get a lot out of it, that's fine. But I think the way that they're set up at the moment, it's very unbound as to how much time you could put in. So yes, I think there is a the actions are supposed to sort of limit how much you can get out of people, because there's only so much you can promise to other people that you're going to do. But I think I was saying, looking at communication, well, maybe you can only send, maybe you've only got 3 stamps, so you can only send 3 emails a day, or maybe maybe it takes a whole day for something to arrive. At that point, you're not using email, and you've got some other system that sort of mediates some messages. But some way of slowing the game down to an extent, just to make it so that the top end of people that devote their life to the game maybe can't, to give everybody else a chance to sort of catch up, would be good. I think limiting communication is the key, in whatever way that is.
Yeah. Okay. Because it's kind of interesting, and Becky is saying it again in the pub, and it's something I kind of feel it's the more time you have, as you said, John, the more you can kind of get out of it. And for me, there's a follow-on question here: is that what are the obligations of the game runner to the players? Is it fair, basically, to be running a game where people have more time are getting more out of it? Because that's not something you have in a traditional game. Everyone has the same amount of time in which to do things, and most games try and have limiting factors on letting other people just have more time to engage with things. So what are the obligations of the game runner to the players? And we'll come back to you on that one, John, and we'll go back over to Rob for the whole thing.
If you could just repeat the question there for me, please.
Sure. Do play-by-email games have a problem with unequal engagement, or is it a feature? And on from that, depending on how you feel about it, would you fix it? And on from that, what are the obligations of the game runners to the players in regards to some people, if they have more time, they can do more?
I think this is very much a situation where you treat it as being, a games master, storyteller, dungeon master, whatever. So you would use the same skills and thought processes. Are people having a good time? What can I do to balance it? Well, I do very much think that this is a feature. Some people will just have more time. Some people will just be more vociferous. Mega games, role-playing games, you will have people who are more charismatic, who are able to draw attention more often, who are just louder. These things happen, which is why you have to put expectations in place and rules around communications. So if people are sending a ridiculous number of emails, you should say, could you cool your jets a little bit, please? Or even better, have some expectations set out in your game material before the game begins, as that's an excellent way of making sure that you don't get bombarded with stuff. So yes, those are my views. It's a feature, and there are ways to deal with it.
Okay, thank you, Stuart.
I would say I'm closer to Rob on this. I would say it's a feature and a bug, and it's one of those things where I don't think you're going to find a perfect solution, because, as has been said, the people who put more time in get more out of it, and they probably do get a better experience, and the people who don't have that time or aren't as invested don't get as good an experience, and that is a shame. Like Rob said, there's an element of, you will get that in any mega game. Every mega game, you've got one person who's a bit quiet and unsure what to do, and Control can help them, and they should help them, but they're probably not going to have as much time as the person who's done this before, or one of those new people who just takes it like a duck to water. So there's an element of it not really being fixable, and there definitely are ways you can fix it on a design space from different directions. I guess I can't really take a firm stance on this, because really you are just going to have to decide what your kind of game is for. Is it for the crazy people? Is it for the people who have to go to work in the morning? And the best thing, which all three of our games did do, I would say, about this is you could send as many emails as you wanted, and that definitely gave you an advantage for information. But all three of our games were really strict on, you don't get more actions. You can talk to people, and that gives you a huge impact. But in mechanical terms, to actually affect the world, everyone, no matter how invested they are, has the same amount of actions. And I was really firm whenever anyone asked for anything that could give them more. Absolutely no way. Also because that'd be more work for the control team, but because it would help to establish some level of parity. So Becky's just commented, sometimes the crazy people have to go to work in the morning. That would be me, who's worked through the entire pandemic in a hospital and functioned on far too little sleep throughout my entire mega game.
Yeah, it's interesting this, because the way some people think it's a feature and a bug is kind of really interesting to me. And when I think about it, I keep coming back to most games have limiting features. And I think you're right, Rob, in kind of pointing out the storyteller or dungeon master aspects of this, because these are very close to kind of role play games. In that fashion, because as you've all mentioned, you've got a lot more time with people in order to kind of look over stuff and see what they're doing and craft those experiences. To the three of you, do you think there's merit in different types of these games, one that is unrestricted for hardcore players and one that has more of a limitation on emails, whether it be how many you can send in a day or how long it takes to get there? Basically, on one side, control of emails, and on the other side, unrestricted. Or do you feel that inherently one of these approaches kind of limits and breaks the format? An open question to any of you who'd like to answer that.
Well, I think that, you can always change this up a bit, as using WhatsApp for interplayer communications, having an in-character WhatsApp and an out-of-character WhatsApp, or even seeing as where we are right now, a Discord would be fairly useful, and just another way to approach it, as long as you've got the in-character and the out-of-character, but then ultimately all of the actual details and all of the actual actions are done via email. So it's still by email, but you've got people talking to each other sort of in other places as well.
We had a Discord and halfway through the game, we had a sort of a fair shift in the way that the rules in the game worked. to address some problems with it. And one of those was creating a bunch of in-character Discord channels for the different groups in the city. And some of them worked brilliantly. So the council were sending these sort of 100-email-long email chains discussing individual bits of minutiae about, city politics and things. And then when they got a channel, that became a lot more manageable, and they were talking in that. And you can put a slow mode on Discord channels so that you can't post more than once every, minute or 5 minutes or hour or whatever, so they don't go nuts. But other players, we had complaints saying, well, if I'm doing a play-by-email game, I get an email, and then there's a general expectation that you're going to reply to that as and when. Whereas on Discord, I had an in-character Discord thing for the academics, and like 3 people would get on there, they would organise something in real time essentially, and then the player who has to go to work and can't access their Discord from work has now been completely cut out of the entire decision-making process. So yeah, it was it was good in one way and bad in another way, which I think is probably how this question goes. I think there's room for both types of games, and I'd like to try and run the limited version.
And I'm the kind of psychopath who'd probably want to run the unlimited version. But I broadly agree with John, especially on the Discord thing. And I'd like to expand that point by saying, while they certainly do have their place, we've been talking about sort of these games taking too much time. But one thing that's great about emails is you can do your emails and you can walk away. If it's a Discord or a WhatsApp, you can't really walk away in the same way. Your phone is going to be buzzing the whole time, calling you. I actually think in terms of players losing their lives, that's actually worse rather than better than emails. However, John's example of the council is a fantastic point where it is better because they already had that. So they do have their place, but I don't think they're a solution to the problem at all. I think it's a consideration, it's a tool in your kit. And to come brief back to the initial question, yeah, there's absolutely space to expand this design much further, to have more hardcore versions, less hardcore versions. So one thing that went down quite positively in Afterlife was sort of NPC engagement, which I think was a huge amount of work for the control team, myself included, and is one of the big drivers of some players having an advantage over others because they've talked to all these characters and potentially even got emotionally invested in them. And that is both a positive and a negative, and one thing you could double down on or pull back away from. And I think expanding this design space in different directions is the healthiest and best thing for it, even if that will lead to some games that are more suited to some people. You want to try and get that clear up front, but you're still going to have someone who accidentally wanders into the wrong sort of game without knowing. And again, we want to try and avoid that as much as we can. But speaking realistically from real life experiences, every mega game I've ever played in has had one person sitting in the corner overwhelmed who control have tried to help, but it's just not for them. And that is sad. It is somewhat unavoidable, I feel.
Okay. Thank you. So on to a different question then in casting, because all through these games they're much more role play than different types of mega games. So how important and how difficult was casting for your games when you had pre-written characters? And would play-by-email games work with player-created characters? Rob, let's kick off with you.
It wasn't particularly difficult, and yes, they would. Right. Anyway, yeah. Moving on to a bit more with that. Yeah, of course. If you want to do something where players can insert their own character, set them the expectations. If you've got some kind of character design guide, that sounds like it would be fun and cool. Yeah, that would be absolutely fine, and there's no reason that shouldn't work out. But what was the other part apart from character creation?
Was there any difficulty putting people into pre-written characters? I suppose, did anyone go into a pre-written character and have problems with that pre-written character, making it their own?
No, not specifically. And then because of the length of time involved, you can see an email from someone where they're going completely off-piste and have entirely the wrong idea. So you can just reel them back with that. If anything, that's a strength, as it means you've got more of an opportunity to say to someone, that's not quite there, or would you like to change this a little bit, and we'll just change it behind the scenes. No one needs to know. So you've got greater scope to be able to fit things to people, or to just talk to them about their preconceptions.
Yeah. Okay. John.
Casting. It was no harder or more easy than a normal mega game. I would say casting people. There's a questionnaire. You've got roles. We gave people more wiggle room than you'd normally get. I think we're in a mega game to sort of bed into their role a little bit more, customize it a little bit, as long as it still fit the same sort of niche within the world, which probably helps mitigate any problems that there might have been with taking on a character that isn't yours. So I think it's about as tricky as a mega game in my experience.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart, I'm aware yours had quite a bit more characterization than I think the other two did.
I would say mine was on a similar level to in terms of you had kind of roles with some guidance, but there's room to make it your own. There's definitely space in the design to have, like in Morana Golf, Rob's game, completely open character creation with a few limitations, like you are X, go nuts, whereas and Afterlife were more specific in terms of you are this role from this organization, this is your job. But within that space, make it your own. And I think the space of both these designs, and neither is explicitly better than or worse than the other. It just depends on what your setting needs or your plans are.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Thank you. So a question from the audience from Ben Kane. We've covered it a little bit, but let's go back to it. Do you think that Discord channels become more necessary when there are projects that groups of players are meant to coordinate on? Since Afterlife didn't have that same structure, teams of players with similar roles, is that why it wasn't necessary until the end? That's a bit of a mouthful, so it's one up from the bottom in the pub. Rob, let's start with you.
Okay, so yes, I think that having some medium where you can have people all chat together is very useful. In the alternative history play-by-email game that I played that inspired me to do Morana Golf, we had the WhatsApp, which included specifically a council chamber where any players who were involved in that particular part of the game could go and talk in character and arrange things in character, which I thought was really useful. For Morana Golf, there were a few sessions where people all came together on Zoom. So overall, I think it's quite a useful thing to be able to do, yes, even if it's the players arranging it themselves.
Yeah. Okay. John.
Yeah. I guess it's probably more useful for councils and things, given that that's how it was useful in having a Discord channel, but it was probably detrimental to people that weren't in councils. One problem that we definitely ran into was that we didn't have with Morana Golf was different time zones, which, with emails, if it's over a period of days, you can set up a group email, you can have these conversations over these periods of time, and it's fine. Whereas if you've got real-time communication, that can really mess things up for some people. So if you're in the same time zone, maybe it would be a lot easier.
Yeah. Stuart.
I'll answer very briefly. So one of the many reasons Afterlife only really had one explicit team who did get their own Discord channel was because, I knew this would be a lot of work. And by not making specific teams that would require a lot of coordination, this was my attempt, which was probably failed, to sort of control the madness. Although I think given the game ended up being roughly 11,000 emails, that was probably a failed attempt.
Okay. Yeah, so a question from the audience from Baker Becky. Are there any settings you think lend themselves particularly well to PbEM games? Any that don't work? Any connecting features regarding those that work, don't work? Who would like to take that one first?
Well, politics, strategy, anything with factions, I think they lend themselves particularly well. Having previously done forum games, which are very similar. In fact, Stuart was also there in the grand old days of the Conclave.
A very long time ago.
Yeah, when we were both 14 or so. Over half a lifetime. I'll weep about that later. But yes, I very much think that anything where you need to, which is a bit higher level, is ideal. So it doesn't matter if you're gangs in 1890s London, or if you happen to be the great houses of Westeros, or if you are diplomats all sorting out what's happening with Bajor in the wake of the Cardassian occupation. Anything which is a bit higher level, I think, is where these games shine. If you're going into it and you want to have everything much lower down, so for example, if you try to do it with elements of dungeoneering, or going into dungeons and each of you as a character, it's going to take a long time and you're going to lose interest. But I think when you've got that sweet spot of higher level, sending things out, it works really well. So that's where I'd say it fits quite nicely.
Yep. John?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got much to add. I think it's just agree with Rob that high level stuff to so that your actions can be basically your actions need to be quite large so that you can do one or two of them in a week and it feel good. Yes, no. If you're raiding the dungeon, you're raiding the entire dungeon in one action.
Yep. Okay. Question from MegaCon Chris. Could a play by email mega game be added into a real life mega game? Would it add anything or just more unnecessary complexity? Perhaps it being run in a few weeks before the game starts. Let's start with Stuart on that one.
Well, I always love people with insane ambition, and that is an incredibly insane sort of level of ambition there. I'm struggling to imagine how that would work, because every mega game ends in madness, explosions, fires, and wonderful, wonderful things. So that would be presumably your starting state for your then real-life mega game. So I think it's a very bold idea. It's not something that I think I would consider doing, but I will never tell someone that their idea is too crazy. I would always just tell them, go into this with open eyes, think about this very, very carefully, because off the top of my head, I have no idea how you do that. But best of luck to you if you try.
John?
I used to do a LARP called Maelstrom, which that had sort of weekend games, and then I didn't engage with it much, but there was some kind of system in between the weekends. I don't think it was particularly fleshed out necessarily, but you could take actions on some of the systems. So I think there's no reason why not. I don't know. I can't think of a situation off the top of my head where you'd get a huge amount out of it. Maybe you'd probably have to limit the play by email game and the effects it can have quite heavily. Maybe if there's a play by email game and you're choosing to sort of how to set up the starting state for the mega game. Maybe that could be interesting. Starting to form alliances. There's a game called Winterhorn, which has a way of sort of choosing options each turn in order to sort of see how the story progresses. So if you had quite a limited system like that, where you're essentially doing the first 3 turns of the mega game, but in quite a scripted kind of a way before the game, so when you get there, everybody can hit the ground running. Maybe that could be interesting. I'm designing a game off the top of my head, so it's all a bit great.
That's what we like to hear.
Yeah, but
interesting.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that Case Blue and It'll All Go By Christmas both had pre-planning elements to their games.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
I got there first, sorry, Rob. But yeah, to finish that thought, and those were kind of crucial too, because it would be too many decisions to make right at the start of the day. So they had some of those kind of stacked up for you. I'm sorry, Rob. Now that I've stolen your thunder, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I'll never forgive you. This is going in the book of grudges. Right, so, yeah, I completely disagree with what Stuart says. He has bad, wrong fun, and I will have to exterminate his line for this heinous crime against gaming. Not that I ever give in to hyperbole. Yeah, no, I think that if you have a situation where you could do a play by email that feeds into a mega game, I think that would be amazing. As I already mentioned, you could do something around legacy games. So if you had, as an example, 8 weeks, for example, if you set, these are the 8 weeks, that'll be 8 turns, we're going to have the play by email. At the end of this, as has just been mentioned, that will be the setup for the mega game. You have the mega game. At the end of the mega game, you can have people either take pictures, well, you can go around and take pictures of the tables, or you can fill in forms at the end, as plenty of games already have short forms which happen to take feedback. If you capture that information, you can then have another, for example, 8-turn play-by-email game. I think there is entirely the capability to be able to fit these in to mega games, and whilst it would be quite an undertaking, I think it would be really interesting and a lot of fun. And having seen Zane in the audience, it also makes me think of, if it's the same Zane, it makes me think of an idea that he had, which was basically a choose your own adventure sort of element in the games beforehand. And I think this, along with the It's Still Not Over by Christmas planning game, and and also Case Blue, I think it fits in really nicely, and it helps build the immersion, especially because I remember various games like Becky's here, the Everybody Dies, which was the Game of Thrones mega game. We had set up house Facebook groups beforehand. It helps everyone feel a sense of ownership. They get hyped about it. And if you have that play-by-email part that feeds into a mega game or has come out of a mega game that you have been part of, then I think that you're going to feel as though you're really immersed, which is one of the things that the medium does well. So please don't hurt me, Stuart.
I give a very short rebuttal to that.
How dare you?
So, very short rebuttal.
Very
to
short.
That. Well, yeah. I wasn't saying it was bad. It'd be very short. So we talked about immersion as a positive, but let's say the people who play the sort of play-by-email that leads into the real one aren't able to come, or you get some players who weren't part of your play-by-email that was meant to be building hype. They're coming in cold, and they have no idea about all these pre-existing relationships that other people have formed. So actually, I think you actually convinced me it's a bad idea just then with that point, because you're going to have dropouts or people who don't turn up or come in randomly. You're just limiting your player pool, or making some people start a one-day game with an innate advantage or disadvantage.
I was not at the Versailles conference, but I believe if I was given the role of Georges Clemenceau, I would do a satisfactory effort with a briefing of being able to play the Tiger of France. So I think with a briefing, your point is null.
Okay, so that's an interesting argument, but we're coming up on the end of time, so we'll continue that in the bar. Hopefully our three guys will stay around. So yes, thank you very much, guys, for turning up to this. It's much appreciated. Any quick 30-second closing statements from any of you before we adjourn to the bar?
Yeah, this has been really cool. Thank you very much for inviting to the first one, and I look forward to seeing more in future, and also seeing really cool games that both Stuart and John put on in future.
Yep, I guess just before we go then, I think we ought to plug Amiga, which is the group that's been set up that will be running at least several of these games ongoing. We've got one that's going to start in the next couple of weeks. It's been filled up called Dusk City, so it's exciting. It's the Vampire one, but there'll be more later in the year. So yes, Amiga's going to have lots of fun play by email stuff, and I definitely plan on revisiting in some kind of play by email format. Probably trying to limit, just how much goes on in the game. But yes, should be good. I don't know when though.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to thank you, thank you, and thank everyone that's listening for sort of paying attention and taking part. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where this sort of format goes in the future. I'll probably be involved in some capacity.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all three of you very much again. So a plug for our next one, which is on the 11th of July, which is titled Running Mega Games Online, which will have Kurt LaRue speaking about experience of running the ever popular Den of Wolves online after the pandemic struck and how they put that together. And Joe Morris, and Joe works for the British Civil Service and takes part in their wargaming network. Joe will talk about the technical implications of Discord bots and how they've helped run games he's been involved with. So once again, thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you very much to everyone who has come and had a listen. This will be up on YouTube in about a week's time. And from me, Mr. Mega Game, and the other organisers, thank you very much, everyone. And I hope to see you over in the bar. Thanks, everyone.
Cheerio. And if anyone wants to have a quick look at some immersion stuff I've just posted in the pub, the order style that I did for all of Tim's games, because I am a little bit extra sometimes. So it is a PDF, but if you want to get it, then it's there.
Brilliant. So over to the bar, everyone, to continue any chats you'd like to have. Thanks, everyone.